Wyoming Territory. June 1883, the rain came down steady over the town of Red Butte, soaking the packed dirt road, the wooden porches, and the single white church that sat at the edge of town like a promise someone forgot to keep. Patrick Whitlow stood under his hat's brim, boots planted in wet gravel, watching the church doors swing open. The preacher's voice had gone quiet 5 minutes ago. The pews had emptied fast after that. And now, all that remained was the bride still in her lace dress, veil hanging limp, hands clenched around a bouquet of wilted sage and wildflowers. She stood just inside the doorway, staring out as if she could not believe the man she was supposed to marry had simply never shown. Her name was Willa Thorne. She had not cried. Not yet. Patrick stayed where he was, arms loose at his sides, rain dribbling off his hat onto his shoulders. He had not come for the wedding. He had come back into town for supplies, riding in from his small spread north of the hills. He had not expected to see her again, not like this. Willa stepped outside at last, her boots splashing lightly on the wet steps. Her dress dragged through the puddles, and still she did not lift it. She saw him then. "Patrick," she said, voice small but steady. He nodded once. "Willa." For a second, she looked like she might hold herself together. Then her fingers clenched tighter around the stems of the bouquet and broke one. "He is not coming." She said it like a fact she had finally accepted. "I know." Patrick's voice was low. "I waited a while. Thought maybe he was just late." She gave a soft, humorless sound, almost a laugh, but not quite. "Folks will talk. They already are." She looked out toward the road, empty but for a few scattered townsfolk pretending not to stare. "I should go." "You got someone waiting for you?" Patrick asked. Willa shook her head. "No, my folks are gone. My uncle left last year for Colorado. He wanted me to come with. I said no." Patrick shifted his weight, watching the way her fingers trembled now. "You cannot stay in that boarding house forever. I was going to move into his house after the wedding." Her words were clipped, like each one cost her something. He took a slow breath. "Come with me." She blinked at him. "What? Come to my place, just for a few days?" "Until you figure what you want to do." Her jaw tensed. "You do not owe me anything. I know that." He kicked at a rock in the mud. "But I am not going to leave you standing here in the rain." She looked toward the church, then back at him. "You do not mind what people will say?" He met her eyes. "Let them talk." Willa's shoulders finally dropped, the breath leaving her like the fight had gone out with it. She nodded once. "All right." Patrick turned, leading her to where his horse and wagon waited. He helped her climb up into the seat, careful not to touch her more than he had to. Her dress was soaked. Her veil had blown off somewhere behind them. She sat with her hands in her lap, eyes on the road ahead. They rode in silence for a long time, thunder rumbling low in the distance. Red Butte faded behind them, and the land unfolded into open prairie and distant hills. "You live alone?" she asked after a while. "Have for 2 years now. Place is small, just me, 2 horses, and a few head of cattle." She nodded. "Quiet out there?" "Very." Another pause, then she said, "You used to come by the mercantile every week." He glanced at her. "That was a long time ago. You always bought extra flour, said it was for the mice. I do not like to run out. And you always asked about me, even when I was with him." Patrick was quiet. Willa looked down. "Why?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Because I never stopped thinking about you." Her breath caught. He added, "But you chose him, so I kept my distance. I thought he was what I wanted." Her voice cracked just a little. "Turns out he was just what I hoped he might be." They said nothing more after that. By the time they reached Patrick's place, a single-story cabin tucked beneath a rise where cottonwoods grew, the rain had eased. He helped her down, showed her inside without a word. The place was clean, warm. A fire burned low in the hearth. "I will sleep in the barn," he said. "No," she said quickly. "Please, you should not have to do that. I am not letting you sleep out there." She glanced around. "There is only one bed. I will take the floor." Willa opened her mouth like she might argue, then stopped. "Thank you." He gave her a short nod and stepped out to grab dry wood from the shed. When he came back, she was standing near the fire, arms wrapped around herself. She had taken off the dress and now wore a simple cotton shift he kept for guests, though none had come in a long while. "You must think I am pathetic," she said. "I do not." He set the wood in the hearth. "I think you are brave. I feel like a fool. You loved someone. That is not foolish." She turned to him. "Did you ever love anyone?" "I did once." He looked at her. "You?" Willa's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes shone in the firelight. He added, "I never expected anything from it. That is not why I brought you here." "I know," she whispered. He stepped back, giving her room. "I will let you rest." But as he turned, she reached out, fingers wrapping around his wrist. He stopped. "Stay," she said. He looked down at her hand, then into her eyes. "Willa, I do not want to be alone tonight." He nodded once slowly. "All right." They lay side by side on the bed, not touching. The silence between them was soft this time, not heavy. Rain tapped gently against the window. Willa turned her head toward him. "Thank you for coming today." Patrick looked at her. "I could not stand the thought of you being left like that. Not you." She reached for his hand then, threading her fingers with his. And for the first time in years, Patrick Whitlow let himself believe that maybe something good was still waiting for him out here, past the fields and fences, past the pain. It had always been her. The sun rose behind the cottonwoods, pale and slow, brushing gold across the frost-laced grass. Patrick stepped out into the chill with a quiet breath, carrying a bucket to the pump. The ground held a dampness from the night's rain, and the air smelled like wet pine and ash. He worked without hurry, shoulders loose beneath his canvas shirt, drawing water with steady pulls. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Willa stood wrapped in one of his old wool blankets, her hair loose and falling around her shoulders in tangled waves. Her bare feet stayed just inside the doorway, but her eyes searched the yard like she was trying to place herself in this new morning. "You cold?" he asked. She pulled the blanket tighter. "A little." He set the full bucket down. "There's coffee warming on the stove." She gave a slow nod and stepped back inside. By the time he joined her, she'd found the tin cups and filled both. She handed him one without meeting his eyes. "I can help with something," she said. "You don't have to. I want to." Her voice was quiet but sure. "I won't sit here while you work around me." Patrick drank, then set the cup down. "You know anything about horses? I can saddle and brush. I used to help my father before we moved to town." He studied her for a beat. "You can come out after breakfast. I'll show you the fence line, too. It's still standing, but I like to check it every few days." Willa sat at the table, folding her hands. "I dreamed of my mother last night." Patrick sat across from her. "What kind of dream?" She was standing by the river near our old homestead in Nebraska. She didn't say anything, just looked at me and smiled like she knew something I didn't. Willa touched the rim of her cup. "I woke up thinking maybe she wouldn't be ashamed of me after all. She wouldn't. You don't know that. She raised you. She'd know your heart." Willa's eyes stayed fixed on the wood grain of the table. "I thought I was doing the right thing, choosing a life that looked safe. I didn't realize how much I'd given up until it slipped through my hands." Patrick leaned back, his hands resting on his thighs. "You didn't lose anything worth keeping, Willa." Her eyes lifted to his. "You sure about that?" He nodded once. "I watched you walk through town with him. You looked like someone trying to fit into a coat sewn too tight." That brought a flicker of something across her face. Not pain, exactly something closer to release. "I should have seen it sooner," she said. "He always wanted me quiet. Said I talked too much when I was nervous." Patrick didn't answer right away. Then, "You can talk as much as you want here." She looked down, blinking fast. "Thank you. I mean it." They ate together in silence after that, biscuits from the tin he kept sealed tight, honey from the jar she found tucked near the stove. When they finished, Willa helped wash the tin plates in the basin without waiting to be asked. Outside, the wind had picked up, pulling through the grass with a dry whisper. Patrick led her to the small corral where his gelding and mare stood waiting. Willa offered her hand to the mare first, letting the horse sniff her fingers before brushing its flank with long, even strokes. Patrick watched her a moment, then turned toward the tack shed. "You ever mend a leather strap?" he called back. "Once. My uncle's saddle tore in the cinch and I patched it well enough to hold." He passed her a worn bridle. "This one's fraying along the edge. If you can fix it, I'll be grateful." She took it carefully. "I'll do my best." While she worked, he walked the fence line, checking the posts for rot and the wire for slack. He found one section leaning, a post softened by damp soil. By the time he returned to the yard, she'd finished the repair and was sitting on the porch step, rubbing a cloth over the polished leather. He sat beside her, the wood warm beneath them from the sun now higher in the sky. "You always been this handy?" he asked. She gave a small shrug. "I was never much for sewing lace, but I can patch a saddlebag and bake bread without burning it. That's more useful out here." "I always thought so, but that's not what men in town looked for." Patrick ran a hand over his jaw. "Town doesn't know much about what lasts." Willa glanced at him, then away. "What about you? You ever think about going back east? Folks say there's more comfort there." He shook his head. "My brother went east. He wanted marble floors and gas lamps. I wanted sky and quiet." "You two still talk?" "No. He stopped writing after our father passed. Guess our lives got too different." Willa's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry." Patrick looked out toward the far hills. "I used to think I needed to prove something to him. Now I just want peace." She drew her knees up, resting her chin on them. "I think I want the same." They sat like that for a while, the wind rising and falling around them. A hawk circled above the ridge, its shadow brushing the grass in slow arcs. Eventually, Willa stood and brushed her hands on her skirt. "I'll fix supper tonight. Your stores are low, but I can make do." Patrick rose beside her. "You don't have to do that. I know, but I want to." She gave him a look that held no apology, only quiet certainty. He nodded. "All right." As she stepped back inside, Patrick lingered on the porch, eyes on the horizon. The land stretched wide and steady around him, the light shifting with the hour. Something in him, long buried under silence and distance, began to stir. Not loud, just steady and sure. He didn't name it yet, but it was there. By the third day, the rhythm between them had settled into something quiet but certain. Willa rose before the sun and tended the hearth, coaxing the fire back to life with kindling she'd stacked herself. Patrick came in from the pasture with the first pale light, boots damp with dew, and they shared the morning in a way that required no mention. That afternoon, Willa stood barefoot beside the cabin, sleeves rolled past her elbows, scrubbing linens against the washboard. The breeze carried the scent of sage and dust, and somewhere out near the ridge, a mourning dove called low. Patrick was mending a gate latch nearby, his back to her, but his ears picked up the moment she stopped scrubbing. He didn't look up until she spoke. "I never told you how he left." Patrick stood and wiped his hands on his trousers. "You don't have to." "I want to." She wrung the linen out slow, her knuckles pale. "He sent a note to the preacher, not to me, said he'd gone north with a rail crew. Didn't leave a forwarding address." Patrick walked over, leaned against the cabin wall, arms folded. "He never deserved your time. I kept thinking if I'd done something different, maybe he'd have stayed." She looked down at the water, voice flat. "But I know that's not true." He took a breath. Some men don't know how to stay in one place. Has nothing to do with who's waiting on them. Willa hung the sheet on the line. Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if we'd gone walking that day? He watched the linen sway in the wind. I asked you and you said no. I wasn't ready then. I know. She turned toward him, the sunlight catching the curve of her cheek. I should have said something sooner. I thought you'd already moved on. I never did. The words sat between them, solid as any fence post. She didn't look away. I found your name carved on the old bridge outside of town last spring, she said. Next to mine. I did that the day you got engaged. Willa's throat tightened. Why? Because I needed to leave something of us behind. She stepped closer, the breeze tugging at her hair. I never stopped wondering about you, even after I said yes to him. His voice dropped. Then why didn't you come to me? I didn't think I deserved to. Patrick's jaw worked, but he didn't speak. I kept choosing people who made me feel small, she said, her voice steady. But you never did. Even when I turned away. He looked at her then, long and full. You're not small, Willa, not a single part of you. She reached for his hand, not tentative this time, but firm. He let her take it. I'm not running from anything anymore, she said. And I'm not going back to town. Patrick held her gaze. You don't have to, not now. Not ever. The dove called again from the ridge. Willa leaned into him, her head resting just beneath his collarbone. He wrapped his arms around her, not as a comfort, but as an answer. They stood that way while the wind stirred the grass, and the last sheet flapped dry on the line. The morning haze had lifted by the time Willa finished gathering the last of the eggs from the coop. She pressed a hand to her lower back, easing a dull ache, and glanced at the line where the hills began to rise. June had warmed the soil enough that the pasture grass held its green longer, and the air carried the dry scent of sagebrush and horse sweat. Patrick was down near the creek, driving stakes into the bank. Spring runoff had chewed away part of the edge, and he meant to shore it up before it took more. She walked the slope toward him, careful where the ground turned soft. When he noticed her coming, he straightened and brushed the dirt from his hands. You sure you want to help with this? He asked. It's rough work. I didn't come down to stand around. He passed her a hammer without another word. They worked side by side, the sounds of iron and wood filling the space between them. Willa's palms blistered before noon, but she didn't slow. When they paused to drink, Patrick handed her the canteen and looked toward the water. I've been thinking about building a second room off the back, he said. Would give you your own space if that's what you want. She drank, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. I don't need a room of my own. His brow furrowed. You sure? She nodded. I want to be where you are. He looked at her for a long moment. Then I'll build it anyway, just in case we ever need more space. Willa smiled, but it was quiet, thoughtful. You always think ahead. I've lived too long not to. She crouched again to drive another stake. I want to start planting. Just a few rows near the porch. Beans maybe, some squash, he nodded. There's seed sacks in the shed. Never had much use for them, but I kept them. I'd like to make something grow here. Patrick glanced toward the cabin. You already are. They returned to the house when the sun reached its peak, sweat drying on their necks. Willa stripped off her gloves and washed before starting lunch. Patrick sat nearby, oiling the rifle he kept above the mantel, silent except for the soft click of metal. She set cornbread on the table and ladled stew into bowls. He reached for one, then paused. You always this steady? He asked. She sat down across from him. No, I used to speak too fast. Worry every word might be the wrong one. You don't now. I think it's because I'm not trying to prove anything anymore. Patrick tore a piece of bread. You don't have to. She watched him a moment. What about you? You keep things quiet because you want to, or because it's easier not to say what you feel. He looked up, eyes steady. I kept quiet because I didn't think anyone needed to hear it. And now I want you to know." Willa set her spoon down. "Then tell me." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I never planned on sharing my life with anyone again, but you're here, and I find myself thinking about what this place could be with both our names on it." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "I want that too." Patrick reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we'll make it." Later, while the light softened toward evening, Willa sat at the porch with a basket of mending, needle flashing through torn fabric. Patrick stood by the fence, watching the sky shift from copper to rose. He turned his head at the sound of her footsteps approaching. "I finished the stitching," she said. "That old shirt of yours will hold a while longer." He brushed his hands down his trousers. "You're mending more than shirts, Willa." She stepped close enough he could feel the warmth of her skin. "You gave me a place to stop running." Patrick lifted his hand to her cheek, thumb brushing along the edge of her jaw. "You gave me a reason to build again." She leaned into him, and this time when her lips found his, it wasn't softened by caution. It was full and certain, like a vow spoken quiet beneath stars. They didn't need more words. The sun dipped low, and the night promised warmth. Behind them, the cabin stood solid against the rising wind, its door open, its hearth waiting. The first frost came early that year, crisping the edges of the squash vines and laying a thin coat of silver over the porch rail. Willa rose before the sun, wrapped in Patrick's old wool coat, and walked barefoot across the floorboards to open the shutters. The sky was still deep blue, a few stars clinging to the corners, but the air was sharp with the promise of winter. Behind her, the cabin stirred. Patrick's voice was low with sleep. "You cold?" "I'm all right." She turned back, watching him stretch beneath the quilt. "I just wanted to see the light come up." He sat up slowly, his hair mussed, lines at the corners of his eyes softening. "Come back to bed for a while." "Stove hasn't warmed the room yet." She did, curling beside him beneath the covers, the heat of his body pulling the chill from her limbs. He tucked an arm around her waist and pressed his lips to her temple. "I dreamed about the land again," he said. "Up past the ridge, near where the cottonwoods meet the draw. There's space there. I think it'd take to apple trees." Willa tilted her face up to him. "You want to plant an orchard, maybe not this year. But I want roots, Willa. More than just fences and cattle." She brushed her fingers against his chest. "Then we'll plant trees." He smiled, slow and sure. "Together, always." Later that week, they rode into Red Butte for the first time since the wedding that hadn't come. Willa wore her hair pinned up beneath a bonnet, and Patrick had brushed the dust from his coat. Folks paused in their errands when they passed, but no one spoke out of turn. The town had softened some since the summer, or maybe Willa had. She walked with her chin lifted now, one hand resting lightly on Patrick's forearm. At the mercantile, she picked out fabric for curtains and a bolt of muslin for new pillowcases. Patrick traded for flour, salt, and lamp oil, and lingered near the stove while Willa chose a length of blue calico. "Mrs. Dellinger says the schoolhouse needs a second set of readers," she said, folding the fabric over her arm. "She asked if I might help teach the younger ones letters in the spring." Patrick looked up from his conversation with the storekeep. "You thinking of saying yes?" "I am," Willa said. "Just a half day each week. I'd like to keep busy." He nodded once. "You'd be good at it." Outside, they paused before climbing back into the wagon. Willa glanced toward the white-painted church at the edge of town. "It doesn't feel so heavy anymore." "Not like it did before." Patrick followed her gaze. "You want to go in?" She shook her head. "No, but I'd like to be married proper." He turned to her. "We already are in every way that counts, I know, but I want to stand with you in front of folks. I want to say it out loud." He tipped his hat back. "Then we'll do it. Quiet and small, but we'll do it." They were married 2 Sundays later beneath the cottonwoods behind the cabin. The preacher came out from town, and Mrs. Dellinger brought a basket of fresh bread. Patrick wore his cleanest shirt, and Willa wore the blue calico she'd chosen herself. There were no pews, no music, no long speeches. Just the wind in the leaves and the sound of their voices, steady and sure, as they promised what they already lived. After the vows, Willa set a hand on Patrick's chest. "I never thought I'd feel safe again, not like this." He looked down at her, his voice rough. "You are, for as long as I breathe." The winter came down hard, but the cabin held strong. Willa baked bread with dried apples and read aloud by the fire in the evenings. Patrick carved shelves for her books and built a bench by the window where she could sit and stitch when the light was good. One morning, in late February, she brought his hand to her belly and waited. He didn't speak at first, just rested his palm there, eyes wide. Then he looked at her, his voice hoarse. "Are you sure?" "I am." He pulled her close, burying his face in her shoulder. "We'll do it right, Willa. I'll build whatever you need." "I already have what I need," she whispered. In spring, they planted the orchard. 5 saplings staked against the wind, their roots packed firm with ash and loam. Willa worked beside him, her belly rounding beneath her apron, her hands steady on the shovel. Patrick paused only once, brushing soil from her cheek with the back of his fingers. "These trees'll outlive us," he said. "That's the point." The years that followed were not easy, but they were full. The child came in autumn, a girl with Patrick's eyes and Willa's hands. They named her Ruth, after Willa's mother, and she grew up with the orchard at her back and the sound of her parents' laughter in the kitchen. Willa taught in the schoolhouse twice a week. Patrick expanded the pasture and took on more cattle. They added a second room when Ruth was old enough for her own space, and later, a lean-to for the drying herbs Willa began growing near the fence. They grew older, but not apart. The quiet between them stayed warm, never cold. Every morning, Patrick kissed Willa's brow before heading to the barn, and every night she waited for the sound of his boots on the porch. When the first apple bloomed on the oldest tree, Willa called him over. "Look," she said, pointing. It took. He stood behind her, arms around her waist, and whispered into her hair. "Just like we did." And it was true. Through all the weather and the waiting, the pieces of their lives had rooted deep. They had not been built quickly, but they had been built well, and they held.